Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Creemee Cast. I am here in the Lieutenant Governor's office, Lieutenant Governor of Vermont, and I'm sitting here with the newly elected Lieutenant Governor, John Rodgers. John, thank you so much for having me in here today.
Glad to do it, Paul.
This is now, I think, the fourth time I've interviewed you, or something like that, maybe third guy between Guy and I. But the last time I was talking to you, you were not yet the Lieutenant Governor.
Right, we were still working hard.
Yeah, that's right. You were still on the campaign trail and just putting in all the work. And to be quite honest with you, I can't believe I'm sitting in here with you right now.
Yeah, agreed. A lot of people, I've had several people tell me today that they were wrong. They were sorry. They didn't think that I could do it. And we always believed that we could. We knew it was going to be hard. We knew it was going to be close. But we wouldn't have done it if I didn't have faith I could win.
That's right. And that is a lot of the time what it boils down to. You're putting in that work and getting out there and shaking hands, talking to people, going to events. It never seems to end until, of course, it does.
Yeah.
And so talk to me a little bit about that. Was there any bit of a letdown after the election? Did you feel like a wave of holy cow, I won?
Well, it was super interesting because the couple weeks leading up to the election, a whole bunch of people ask, "Are you nervous? Are you concerned? How are you feeling?" And it's like, no, I'm totally comfortable. And it's weird because I had been a little bit stressed out, working hard, running around, a heavy schedule. Like a couple weeks before the election, this peace just came over me. It's just all of a sudden I just felt like, okay, we worked hard. We did everything we needed to do. Here we are. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, right? And this peace came over me. And it was great, right? And I got home election night. Polls were just about ready to close. And I walk in the house still. I'm just perfect, right? Just feeling totally relaxed, totally confident. And as soon as the numbers started coming in, it was like,
yeah.
It's like the switch flipped. And it was a little tense for a while, but I brought it back down. But it was it was edge of the seat night, the whole night. My boy's watching the results, and he's going 150,000 votes in, and it's only separated by 200. And it's like, he's ahead. Oh, you're ahead.
Yeah.
And it's back and forth. And so it was a pretty intense night. But I had faith, I had confidence the whole night through. And finally, when we saw Brattleboro and Burlington in, and there was still a bunch of outlying small towns, we knew we had it.
So coming out of that, heading into the holiday season, you must have been like, okay, because there was always a little bit of there was contention, right? Like if you actually had won or not, right?
Yeah.
So walk me through that. What was that like?
Well, originally he came out and said on the radio some odd statements, which made people think that he was going to try to contest it. I heard from at least a couple of legislators that he was making phone calls, and he I think he got shot down by several of the people that he called, and the Vermont Democratic Party stepped up and said John Rodgers won. John Rodgers will get the legislators' vote. Shap Smith spoke up. Jim Kondo spoke up. I had several people calling me up saying that this is how Vermont does it, and we're not going to let him get away with this.
Interesting. I do know as well. You were a Democrat for 16 years in the legislature, up until I believe 2020, if I'm not mistaken.
No, pretty much all my life until this spring. When I decided to run, I decided that the Democratic Party's just moved too far to the left, and I wasn't going to run as a Democrat.
Yeah, and I think if you look at some of the fallout, not just your election, but a lot of the other elections in this building, and then Jim Dandino stepping down from his position as the executive director of the party.
Stepping down.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm saying. It's like, what do I know? But my guess is that, when you're calling the most popular governor in America a MAGA extremist or a fascist even, I'm not really sure, how that translates to the rest of the party or the whole state or, the direction of the mindset. But, I do think it's very interesting that you decided to run as a Republican this year. And, I remember talking to you probably back in April before you had decided, or maybe it was May. It was whenever we first started podcasting, and you were like, "I think I'm going to run for lieutenant governor," but at that point, you weren't really sure what your plan was.
Right.
So for anyone wondering, John, I mean, not a Democrat anymore, but that old school Vermont Democrat mentality, I would say I would relate to as well as most of my family. I think that you now still fit that bill. It's just it's under a different banner. And I know it's not really your thing to talk about the national scene because you are Lieutenant Governor of Vermont, but you see this trend everywhere. I mean, this is happening all over the country and really the world. What used to be Democrat or progressive, even, is changing the meanings of these words.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I'm hoping my election did, is move both parties back to the middle. I think we need to jettison the progressives, and that was one of Jim Dandino's problems, is that he embraced the progressives, he let them in, and they flew too close to the sun. The party literally went after a couple of moderate Democrats in the primary. In Burlington, they were protecting progressives instead of helping the Democrat. And typically, parties stay out of primaries, and so I found that very disturbing. So no, I heard from people right after the election that Jim was gone.
Interesting. It took a while, I think, maybe till last week until I had heard about it, but it was nonetheless it was news when I heard it.
I believe it was inevitable.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that. So, John, one of the things that we discussed on an interview earlier this summer was the renewable energy industry, and we had a clip from your podcast that was by far our most viewed clip we've ever had. And I think it went viral not just in Vermont but nationally because it was such the point that you hit home. I think it really struck something with a lot of people about the renewable energy industry and what it really means to be renewable.
The whole argument about the windmills and the solar panels is just, it's silliness. That's not going to save us. I believe in renewable energy, don't get me wrong. But there's just a new study out I just read that said the mining of rare earth minerals around the world is putting over 4,000 species of fish, birds, and wildlife at risk. We know that over 70% of the cobalt that's being mined for batteries, from everything from our cell phone to electric cars, employs slave and child labor. They're cutting down the rainforest. They're destroying the environment and the people of the Congo, so people here can drive Teslas and pretend they're green. If you're using child and slave labor, it's not green.
No. And in a state where we have so many people that are, climate activists, environmentally minded people, where is this, clean heat standard, the renewable energy industry as a whole, Global Warming Solutions Act? Where do you see this all going? And as Lieutenant Governor, what can you do about any of this?
Well, this platform is great because I can influence people in the House and the Senate. I can get out and educate people in the public. I can take input from people in the public. So I think there's a lot that can be done from here. One of the things we want to do is help educate people in the public to a couple of things. Number one, what is the full cost of some of these so-called renewable technologies? If you look at a lot of the legislature wants us to be all electric cars on the road, in a relatively short period of time, but people who are educated know that 70% of the world's cobalt used to make those batteries is coming from the Congo and using slave and child labor to make it. From my perspective, in a truly green, environmentally friendly, socially responsible energy transition, we don't use slave and child labor. We don't destroy a people in a planet, in an environment on the other side of the planet and call it green when it gets here. We know that electric cars, once they're on the ground here in Vermont, are more environmentally friendly than a gas car. But if 70% of the cobalt is be in mind my children and slaves, then most of those batteries have material that has come at the degradation of a people, and I don't think that's okay. Solar panels. I just heard an interview with a Vermont solar developer who, because of President Trump's threat to expand tariffs on China, where a lot of the solar panels are being built, said he stocked up. His warehouses are full. I take issue with solar panels that are being made in China, where there are no labor standards, no environmental standards, and for the most part, they're building them with coal power. I've talked with renewable energy developers in Vermont that are responsible and are sourcing U.S. product. There are U.S. products that have both labor and environmental standards attached to them. And so that's what I'm saying. As we depend on fossil fuels less, which I think is a good thing, we know that, if you stand by a tailpipe and breathe that air, you're not going to feel good for very long. And so we know it's not great for the environment. And so we have to do better for the planet. And I consider myself an environmentalist, but I want to look at the full cost of every one of these things, the human cost and the environmental cost in other places in the world, not just what it does once it's on the ground here.
No, absolutely. I think that opens up a pretty significant conversation today, like literally today, just how many products that we buy from outside the United States and the environmental impact that those products have. I mean, even our cell phones, right? The cell phone I'm using to record this podcast,
sure,
probably made with
cobalt from the Congo.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Or slave labor in China.
Or both, because the cobalt goes to China to be made into batteries, and then it gets shipped here.
I think that we live in a country where we're so blessed that we don't even know that these things. Maybe blessed isn't the right word, but
oblivious.
Oblivious. What do they say? Ignorance is bliss, right? Because we don't know this is where this is all happening. But as we fight for whatever the cause is online, we're using cell phones and not just cell phones, other items that are really the opposite of maybe some of the things that we're fighting for.
Absolutely, and it's the same with some of those solar panels. I mean, I totally support solar energy. I really want to see more solar energy on people's roofs and in people's yards, because I don't want to see Vermont have to build more distribution lines. We need to move towards a very localized grid. We have the ability to make more power locally because transmission lines are extremely expensive, and people don't want to live beside big transmission lines because there's power leakage, and anytime you put power into a big line and transport it a long distance, there's a lot of power loss, and that is the benefit of renewable energy, that it can be produced and used locally, and it should be produced as close to the end user as possible. And I just saw a piece the other night. There's some guys in Vermont that are actually working on the next generation of solar panels, which are supposed to be lighter and more efficient and produce more power. And so we're waiting for technology to evolve so that we can do a better job. But in the meantime, anytime we're moving forward, we need to be assessing the full cost of what we're doing, not just what's happening here in Vermont.
Absolutely. And to your point too, about the expansion of technologies here in Vermont, I just saw today that the Biden administration released a $23 million grant, I think. Did you see this?
Hear that? Nope.
Well, $23 million grant for a tech hub up in Burlington, where they're actually going to be, or maybe not in Burlington, I think it's going to be in Essex Junction. Don't quote me on it, folks. I'm not exactly sure.
Yep.
But they're going to be kind of trying to expand some of the tech and innovation here in the state of Vermont.
Because I read a report like 10 years ago out of MIT that said electric vehicles were actually going to be a blip in time, and the other fuels were going to surpass them. And unfortunately, in this country and around the world, big money rules, right? They said that for the last 50, 100 years, people have been inventing things that would have made automobiles more efficient, and they either sold that technology or they came up missing, right?
Yeah, that's common.
Yeah. And so I think the same can be true of a lot of innovations. If you upset a place where very wealthy people are making a lot of money, there are going to be offers and some that you can't refuse. And but that's the only way we're going to get out of this mess, is to have hubs like that where people can put their brains together and come up with the next best technology. Because I don't think electric cars are great technology. You know, it's like I said, once they're on the road, they're better than fossil fuel for the environment, but they have their issues, right?
Absolutely.
You can't go very far with them. So if you're heading to Florida, I don't think you're going to take an electric car. If it's really cold, Toyota's come out with a whole bunch of new hybrids, which is, I think, a huge step, because in Vermont, like me personally, I live up in the hills. I need all-wheel drive.
Sure.
A lot of the electric cars aren't all-wheel drive. So Toyota's making the hybrids that are. So like I said, that's somewhere in between. Maybe it's not as good, but you can go farther. You got all-wheel drive so you can actually get home. That's important.
Absolutely, here in Vermont, to stay warm too.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting today. I was reading something earlier. I don't remember exactly where I'm reading it, but this whole thing with like Greenland and Canada, and like they want it, right? Well, from my understanding is that there's a lot of resources up in those spaces, up in the far north, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being up here on the northern border, right, a border state. If it wasn't for those resources like oil, for example, which I believe something like a fifth of the world's oil reserves are up in the Arctic Circle.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the U.S. militaries, and not just the U.S. military, global militaries would be somewhat obsolete without oil, right? But these cars, like our whole industry, our whole economy would be obsolete without oil. But I've heard in the past of things like a car that runs on hydrogen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like there's other things too. Like I've even heard vegetable oil. I've heard all, and I'm not just spitballing ideas here. That's not what I'm here to do. But point is, it's like it's obvious that there's other things out there, and we need to be looking into them.
Researching them. Absolutely. No, hydrogen is has great potential. Cold fusion. They're experimenting with, I think, ammonia now. There's a whole bunch of technologies that just need a little bit more time to be developed. But here's the other thing, Paul, and all these folks in this building, a lot of them are guilty of it. I had a couple so-called environmental advocates questioning me one day about something, and you know, their motto is we have to do everything that we can about climate change. And I said, so have you given up commercial air travel? No. And it's like, we can't expect to save this planet and keep living the way we've been living. People expect their avocados from Mexico and the fresh cucumbers from Spain and their grapes from South Africa. And every time they get a chance, they want to jet set off to the Caribbean or some foreign country for their high carbon vacation. It's all wonderful, but if they are really serious, if they really mean we have to do everything, they've got to start giving some stuff up.
Why do you think they don't? What do you think it is?
Well, because most of the so-called environmental advocates in this building are just like any other lobbyist. They're all doing it for money. And that's part of the problem with the renewable energy industry. Not all of it, but a good part of it is a lot of it's about money and profit. And it should be, if you have a business, you've got to make money, you've got to make profit. But there are more environmentally friendly ways to do it and to reach our goals. But I don't think you can do it if you're jet setting off every couple of weekends.
And then coming home and asking people to give up their heating fuel.
Or to pay more. People who can't afford to take that vacation to Chamonix to go skiing.
Sure.
Right? And you're asking them to pay more for their heating oil because they can't afford any other heat system.
That's the disconnect, though.
That's the disconnect.
I think that's the disconnect, is that there's a lot of those folks that don't really even understand what it's like to be somebody who lives in rural Vermont in a trailer and, they got what they have.
Exactly.
That's what they got.
Exactly. And you got to make it last as long as you can, because that's what you have, and you don't have the money to do any better.
It's a really interesting point. So if you were to look into your crystal ball as a former Democrat, someone who has worked with a lot of people in this building, and some of them who are still here, where does the clean heat standard go? If there is any form and version of the clean heat standard that comes out of this year, what does it look like? If there's anything that where the Republicans and Democrats are working together, what does that look like?
Well, I think the clean heat standard needs to go away.
Sure.
We need to keep making market-driven progress. And like I said, heat pumps are more efficient than they used to be already. I mean, just a few years ago, they've come a long ways. They're going to continue to get better. So sometimes rushing headlong into something actually defeats your end goal. First thing we can't do is bankrupt Vermonters to get there, and that's what the clean heat standard was going to do. And so whatever we figure out, it has to be something Vermonters can afford. That's where we start, right? But like myself, and we're going to do some work and probably have some like town meeting halls on land use and how you can actually use your land. Like I plant tons of cover crops and build organic soil, and how you can store carbon in the soil. Right. And I manage my forest sustainably, so I'm storing carbon in the forest. And there are a ton of land management practices which can do incredible things for climate change in the earth. And so I want to do more of that, educate people more on that. And so it's really about getting to a place where we have cleaner fuels, both heating and transportation. We know we would like to clean them up. And I believe that we will get there without overburdening Vermonters with new taxes.
So you did mention some of your goals, like climate policy, environmental goals. Like, mm-hmm. What specifically would you like to see? I know you mentioned carbon capture in soils, those types of things. But like, if there were anything that had to do with, heating people's homes, like where would you want to see it go? Like, what could, if let's say you couldn't, if you had to come up with a compromise with the left, the left wing, the Democratic Party, renewable energy industry, what would that look like? Yeah, my guess is they're gonna come with something. I
don't see it so much as a compromise as I see it looking at the science and what's available and making progress the best we can at a cost Vermonters can afford. That's what I see. And the heat pumps work in a lot of situations, and they're great for shoulder seasons. One of my concerns is that once people have heat pumps, they're going to use them more for air conditioning, when a lot of those people didn't have air conditioning before, which is going to drive up electric usage. But I've also talked with a lot of people who have heat pumps who, when it gets really cold, the heat pumps don't make heat. So you still have to have something for a backup. So we want to make sure that whatever, like we said before, if you've got a furnace that maybe it's a little older, maybe it's not super efficient, but you can't afford to scrap it, we have to make sure that we have programs so that when that furnace quits or becomes undependable, that person has options to switch into a cleaner way of heating. So maybe they go from oil to propane, maybe when that goes out, they can put some heat pumps in and have a propane backup. There's a lot of alternatives, but we also have to trust that a lot of it is going to be driven by market, because if you're using an old inefficient oil heater and it's costing you $5,000 a year to heat your house, and all of a sudden it blows up and you need something different, you're not going to look for another old expensive oil burner if you can find something out there that'll heat your house for a fraction of the price. That's how we sell it. When it starts making economic value for individuals they will make that choice on their own. And people would always rather make their own choice
Oh, of course.
than be forced into something they don't want.
Yeah, and I think we've set them up in a situation where it's almost like this false binary once again, where it has to be one or the other. And It doesn't have to.
It doesn't. No.
And I think that the idea that people, yes, they definitely want to make their own choice, and they're going to want to have to make their own choice based upon an economic decision.
Sure.
But it is frustrating, and I can understand where a lot of people come from. That we live in a society where something like this is only driven by profit, or driven by whatever the capitalism's goals, whatever. People get really upset about this kind of stuff. But and I agree with it, right? Like, I understand, but once again, if you're just taking that system and then replacing it with your own version of profit-driven environmental goals, well, then what are we doing?
No, we want to make real progress, and we want to do it responsibly. I want to make real progress, and I want to do it in a way that is responsible to the planet, the whole planet. And so that means weighing the cost of every mineral, every chemical that's going into them. And is it the best thing for the planet in the long run? For instance, if there's forever chemicals in what you're creating, is that a good use? What's going to happen to them after the life expectancy is done? Is it affecting people in an environment in another part of the world? Are we doing damage there? Are we polluting there? So it really needs to be a holistic look at what we're doing. I believe there are ways to make progress and be, environmentally friendly and responsible as far as labor practices go.
I think
we can't export the pain. That's what I'm trying to get at. Right now, we're exporting a huge amount of the pain.
The heavy lifting, ultimately. Like,
yeah,
we want this green world, and it even comes back once again. Like, they don't have clean coal even in China. Like, they're just spewing it like we used to back in the 1800s. I mean, in the early 1900s.
Yep.
And that causes all kinds of environmental issues, not just particular
and
pollution.
The fallout is actually landing in the U.S.
Yeah, of course. I believe that 100%. I'm sure it is.
Yep.
Yeah, and so we actually we're not avoiding all of the pain, I guess.
Oh no,
we're picking up
some of it's coming right around from the other side of the planet back to us.
One of the big conversations this year, obviously heading into the election season, was the big property tax increase that most Vermonters felt, about 14%, some higher, some a little lower. But that was a huge issue. And everybody's wondering, how is the state going to fix this problem? So as Lieutenant Governor, I know your role is somewhat limited in this, but I don't think you want it to be, right? My guess is you don't want it to be.
No, I want to be involved. And, my involvement, I'm going to actually get a walkthrough of the proposal with the administration in the near term. And I have influence with people in the House and people in the Senate, and I hope to use that influence to make sure we get something done. It's totally unsustainable. I think even before this giant leap in property taxes, the property tax issue has been running at an just unsustainable direction, and it's been outpacing people's increases in their pay for a long time. So when you add 14%, it's shocking.
Year after year.
If we have to do that a couple of years in a row, there's going to be more homeless people. So something has to be done. And so we got to get back to basics, number one. And I think the governor's proposal is going to come out, and it's going to have a foundation. Like, this is what we as the state say you need for money to educate each student. And I think that's a good place to start. Because we're spending way too much per student. I think we're heavy on administration and shuffling paper and, some of this feel-good stuff that we don't have to do. I think we need to get back to basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, because we're spending a huge amount of money and our test scores aren't very good. I mean, we're still, I think I heard Mississippi's actually ahead of us now. And so when we're in the same ballpark as southern states and we're spending this kind of money, there is something dramatically wrong. So I think it's an overall look at the whole system, financing, and how we're educating kids.
Do you think schools potentially will close? Is that part?
I think there will have to be some schools that close, and nobody wants to lose their school. And we, from my perspective, I don't want any schools to close, but we know that we have some schools that need millions of dollars of deferred maintenance work done. And so if that school is not programmatically working, if it needs a lot of work done to it, if there's another school nearby, it may make sense to close that school. And I think we have to look at that. There are going to be some painful choices.
Yes.
And we have two directions we can go. Either we can make some of those painful choices and remake our education system, or we can have another 14% property tax increase. And the people that I talk to on the campaign trail, for the most part, cannot take another hit like that.
No, it was obviously the biggest issue of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a year ago now, kind of, I knew it was an issue 2 years ago, but not quite like it is today. And just talking, I interview people throughout the summer and candidates and people all the time. And it's just like, what is going on in the Statehouse? Why is my property tax so expensive? And like the number of people that just, you've talked about this before too, the number of people that just don't know when this place is in session or just about what's happening here at all. And then all of a sudden they just get this crazy property tax bill and they're like, wait, what? Then they start to pay attention.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you saw obviously the big shift in the political scene here this year. But, even a friend of mine in Brookfield, and I can't say his name off the cuff, but a friend of mine in Brookfield, he's on the school board, and he's talked to me a little bit about like the local elementary school, this very small school that he was able to go to growing up. And there's so many people, this isn't him necessarily, but there's so many people that just have this nostalgic connection to their school. But if we're spending, the town of Brookfield spending, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but $1 million a year to educate 15 kids, it's like, what are we doing?
Yep.
That school has to close. And it's a tough
are
decision.
Are those kids getting the best education they could? Could they be better served at a school that has more to offer?
Well, so I would, not to input I think should be done, but just to give you a thought that I had, it's like, should we focus more on like community education cooperatives locally, especially in the rural areas? And then once you get into the high schools, then you worry about the bigger, atmosphere of being at a school where you have a lot of options, right? Like, I think it's important when young kids are socialized when they're young, they're around people that are their age, they're learning how to deal with people and teachers they've never met before. Mm-hmm. But I guess like my thing is there's so many high schools, right? Just even here in central Vermont, right? Like you got Montpelier, Spalding, Northfield, U32. Wouldn't it make sense just to build a big old high school at the top of exit 7 and just...
We really don't want to have to build giant new buildings because they're so expensive. With a reduction in students, we're hoping that we can find school buildings that are still in relatively good shape, that are located in places where people can come from other areas, because it's an issue. The cost of building, the cost of retrofitting, building costs are out of control right now. Materials have just gotten so expensive. And so, no, we don't want to look at building any giant new schools if we don't have to.
I'll just have fun with it. That's it. Yeah.
But yeah, there's going to be some tough decisions to make. And we just have to build a system that gives our kids a good education and that Vermonters can afford. Those two priorities have got to be met.
So that's I guess that's what I was kind of going for. I was trying to get in the weeds a little bit, but once again, it does come back to affordability. And I think that for most Vermonters, which you probably learned, that's all that matters to them right now. Mm-hmm. People are making tough decisions on what they can afford and what they can't afford. And I'm curious to know, on the trail, what were some of the things that you did hear about where you were like, oh man, like that's crazy. Like, did you have any stories out there, like just specifically with the property tax thing itself?
So I've told this a bunch to folks. There were 3 striking things that recurred over and over. Number one, I'm getting near retirement, and as soon as I'm retired, I'm out of here because I can't afford to live. Number two was I don't go to Burlington anymore. You know, and I feel bad because I have friends that have shops down there. There's great shops. There's great restaurants. I don't go there that much anymore either.
I haven't been in a while.
But I've heard from so many people who, while they were there, their car got broke into. They had to deal with homeless people, people shooting up in the street. Nobody wants to see that stuff. So that was pretty shocking. But the most shocking one was the folks in their prime working age years that still had kids in school that told me, when my kids are out of school, we're out of here because we can't afford to live here. Now that we need those people, that's the demographic we need more of here in Vermont. We need those people to stay here. We would love it if some of their kids stayed here or went away for college and came back here. We need a whole bunch of the generation that's coming out of high school here over the next 10, 15 years. We need a huge number of them to go into the trades. I'm 59. I'm the average age of a tradesperson. When my age group retires, it is going to be hard to find a mechanic or a contractor to build your house or put your roof on or plow your driveway. In fact, it's already hard now.
Yeah,
Try to find a contractor.
It's impossible.
Myself personally, I already have enough work for all of next summer, and I may not get it all done, and so that might, carry into the following summer. And I know a ton of contractors in exactly the same boat. They're booked way, way, way ahead.
No, it's incredible, and I think it's great. Like to your point about families and working families, right? It's like my brother, he's coming here to visit on Friday. He's got 3 kids, but I just said he's coming to visit. He doesn't live here.
Yeah.
My little sister's gonna fly home and come say hello.
Yeah.
She lives in Washington D.C. She's not sticking around Vermont. And I can tell you, as somebody who's lived here, grown up here, spent most of my life here, from what I hear, when you were my age or some of the other folks around, it really wasn't as common. I mean, people still wanted to leave Vermont. Obviously,
there's always been.
There's always, right?
Right.
But like now, it's more like you literally have to, or you're going to be at a disadvantage for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
And I hate feeling like that. Yeah. I always hated feeling.
Yeah. No, because it's gotten to the point where back when I was a kid, you could make a living in the Northeast Kingdom where I live, and you could buy a piece of land or a little house or something. Now you can't. You can, unless you're an entrepreneur or commute, unless you have a good job, the average job in the Northeast Kingdom, you can't afford a house there anymore.
It's totally crazy.
And I think it's the same in most parts of the state.
No, it's worse. The Northeast Kingdom, maybe I'm wrong, but I know there's economic challenges there as opposed to maybe Chittenden County or even down in this area. But man, it just seems like the state has become so affordable, and especially anywhere where there's the ski area.
Well, and that's the problem with the kingdom. We've got depressed wages, but we've got a couple ski areas, and it's always been highly sought after by second homeowners. They want to come up to snowmobile or ski, or
it's a great place for it.
It's a great place for recreation, and that's driven the price up.
No, I think if anything, there's so much we can talk about. Affordability obviously is part of this, but creating the economic opportunity and really the atmosphere in this state for young people. I think this tech hub is great.
That's huge. It really is.
I still think it doesn't. I think it's great. I'm not complaining, but that's still up in Essex Junction.
Mm-hmm.
What about all the boys and girls down here in Washington County and Barrie? Barrie was it was a thriving industry town for a long, long time. Now, I'm not going to say that it could ever go back. Like, we don't want to go back in time. We just want things to evolve. And what does that look like to you potentially as Lieutenant Governor?
Well, I think the tech hub is a great start, but like you said, it's going to be in one place, and that's why I've always been such a strong proponent for tech schools, and especially like BTC, because if we are training engineers and innovators, they can hopefully come up with that new technology, whether it's for, renewable energy or, other things. But what we need is more industry. We need more people who are building durable goods, who are building things that are needed. And those folks who go to schools like Vermont Technical College, those are the folks that, given the right training and the right opportunity, maybe they go to work for a big company over in Chittenden County, and they're building something to do with renewable energy, and then they get this idea and they go, oh, in my spare time I'm going to start building this.
Sure.
And maybe that takes off, and that's the next big business. Maybe it's the next big breakthrough. But that's the kind of innovation we have to be thinking about. It's all about education, making sure our young people have the education that they need, and also just providing support for technical learning and for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. I could tell you, as somebody who's trying to do that exact very thing here in Vermont, I am one of these people who's looking for that next, what's the next innovation? Where's it going to be? Where are things going? If you were to maybe tip the hand a little bit, where do you think things might be going in that space, like entrepreneur space? Because I know there's a lot of creators in this state. I really mean
there are a lot of creators,
a lot of very creative people doing a lot of really cool things.
Yep.
Whether it's breweries, or they're making coffee, or they run some type of contracting business, building custom homes, these types of things. But if there were an innovation in Vermont, maybe you don't know the answer to that question, because it's kind of a, I know there was IBM, we've had.
And that's it. I hope there's 1,000 innovations. John Deere invented the plow here, right? The Fairbanks scales were invented here.
That's a great answer.
There's a million things that can be invented to make people's lives better. But without the proper education, it's really hard for somebody with a good idea to have the knowledge to bring it to market. And so,
or even reality,
or even reality.
Yeah.
But that's why I think our high school tech centers are super important, because that's what gets the mindset started, working with your hands, building things, thinking about how to build things better. To me, it's that creative thinking that people need more of, and maybe aren't getting enough of the way we educate kids now.
No, I think there's definitely some truth to that. And I also think, and I'm not picking on anybody here, but there's a little bit of that old school Vermonters mentality where it's like, it's always a joke that, how many people, I think it's something like, how many people do you need to change a light bulb in Vermont? And it's like, don't change it, because that's kind of the whole state is like, right. We don't really like change, which I kind of get, because that means time's moving on, and who really likes that, right? But it's reality.
Yeah.
And but I think there's a little bit of that, like, people like to hold on to the past, or maybe hold on to and there's some truth to there's some good things about that, but I think the mentality is one of these things that it's hard to overcome for a lot of people to see the change. And I'm talking a lot too about maybe some of the more conservative crowd, some of the native Vermont crowd. They can be a little bit resistant to new people coming in and new things happening. And it's like, I'm one of those people, but we got to figure out how to evolve within that. And I think what you just talked about, there's definitely room for it, and there's a history of it.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And there is a history of it. And Vermont has had an incredible impact on history.
It has.
Especially compared to our small size.
I was down in Florida for a little while last year, at the end of the year, and the amount of references to the state of Vermont that are made, whether it's, some cheese that's made here, Cabot obviously, but there's other cheeses, or it's something that has to do with the ski industry, or maple syrup, or this historical connection to the state somehow. It's like, I was kind of blown away. Like, we might be this little state of 660,000 people, but it's not a do-nothing state. It's not a know-nothing state either. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, we've had an oversized impact, and especially if you look at military service throughout history. It's just incredible what Vermonters have done.
There's been many lives lost for this country, and respect to
Yeah,
every
no,
single
and
one
a
of those people,
lot
man.
of great military folk from Vermont who did historic things, who changed battles, who made a difference.
Pretty incredible stuff.
Yep.
Last thing here, John, you told me this in the cafeteria a couple of weeks ago, and then I read it again in a VT Digger article. One of the first things you wanted to do when you got into this office was put something dead up on that wall. So what is this I'm looking at here? This is pretty cool.
Yeah, this is a European mount of the first whitetail I ever got over 200 pounds. He was like 204 pounds, just over. But I did the mount myself. That's a piece of wood off the farm. Hunting is something that my family has done for generations on the farm. When we had time to recreate, it was often hunting and fishing. It's something that's deeply instilled in me. I didn't get much time to hunt this year, but I'm hoping next year, off year from campaign season, I actually get a little time. You know, a lot of people think it's all about killing an animal, and I love venison. I think it's some of the best meat there is. It's, you know, it's organic, it's lean. That is important to have that protein source in your freezer. But to me, it's more spiritual and more deep, just to get the opportunity to get away from the phone, to go sit in a tree, to enjoy nature, to listen to the birds, to watch the wildlife. I see deer all the time. I don't shoot every deer I see. I saw a couple legal bucks this year. They were small, so I let both of them pass, and I often see doe and fawn, and it's just wonderful to be out there. I had a bald eagle fly over me this year, something that when I was a kid we never saw.
I saw 2 of them this year.
Yeah, it's awesome. We have them. We see them regularly now. We have a lot of red-tailed hawks. We do a lot for wildlife around the farm. We actually plant a lot of food plots, which are dual purpose. They feed the wildlife, but they also we plant things like radishes and turnips, which have a very deep taproot, and they break up the soil. They bring nutrients up from way down deep, and then the fruit breaks up. It stores carbon, and it helps lighten the soil. But at the same time, it feeds the wildlife. It feeds the birds. We put special blends in for pollinators and other beneficial insects. So it's great for the environment. And we really enjoy seeing all the diverse wildlife that uses it and feeds it.
It's incredible. And I know you are an outdoorsman, a hunter. Are you a trapper?
The only trapping I do is if we have a pest problem, like a coon or a skunk. I haven't done any other for a long, long time.
So I know you are a sportsman, if you will, here in Vermont. And I know that going into this election season, you know, you hosted a couple rallies here, two rallies here.
Yeah.
And a lot of those folks that showed up were sportsmen, hunters, trappers, people that really were cared and were passionate. Specifically, I believe it was a bill called S52. Was it S52?
Yeah, I can't remember.
I can't remember either. It doesn't matter. But at that point, obviously, you were not Lieutenant Governor yet, but here you are. So anything you'd like to say to the folks out there?
Well, that's really where it all started. Those rallies were not only about the fact that some people wanted to get rid of the Fish and Wildlife Board, which is, in my opinion, one of the best functioning boards the state of Vermont has ever had. They've done an excellent job. But there were also the property tax, the Unaffordable Heat Act, all those bills were moving forward. And so we brought together a really diverse bunch of people from the left to the right and everywhere in between, with the basic premise that we weren't going to agree on everything, but we all agreed on these few core things. And so we came together to work on these few core things. And that's how I think the legislature needs to work. It's like they're not going to agree on everything, but we can make progress on stuff that we mostly agree on.
It's possible.
Yeah. But no, the whole outdoor thing is one of my passions. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, John, thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you. Glad to do it.